My name's Christine Dixon. I'm the Senior Curator of International Painting and Sculpture at the National Gallery of Australia, and part of my job is to look after blue poles. One of the most interesting things about this painting is that it's so big. People forget when they see reproductions of works of art, everything looks the same size and flat. But when you come and look at this beautiful work, what you see is that it's more than 2 metres tall and it's nearly 5 metres long. Pollock's technique was not, as you can see, as an easel painter, someone who took a brush made of animal hairs and applied paint to a vertical or a sloping surface. What he did instead was use any implement he liked to pour and dribble and fling paint at the canvas. And yet he could draw so subtly with such intricacy and ideas about the lattice work, the three-dimensionality of the painting. Because the more you look at the work, the more deep it becomes, and then you step away and it becomes a surface again. Jackson Pollock wrote about his technique in 1947. And he said, "On the floor, I am more at ease. I feel nearer, more a part of the painting, since this way I can walk around it, work from the four sides, and literally be in the painting." The large canvas, it's a linen, a Belgian linen, it's a commercial canvas. He primed it with black paint. So he was working on a dark surface towards the light. And that, I think, is part of the mystery of what you see here. In the details of the work, you can see a lattice work pattern of white marks of paint. So obviously it's to do with gravity. He's on the floor, the work's on the wall, and then he puts it down on the floor again. And he works through in brilliant house enamel paints of orange and yellow. And as well as that, he adds silver aluminium paint, just a commercial paint, as well as the oil paint that he uses in the blacks and the yellows. And finally, what he does to make the work is he gets a piece of 4x3 timber and makes the poles in the darkest blue you could possibly use, blue that's so dark it's almost black, a Prussian blue. And then he marks the rhythm of his idea about this canvas across the work on the floor. And if you go close enough, you can see the marking into the surface of the other layers of paint. That's so interesting when you look at it, that it seems simple in a way, and yet the poles are possibly the most complex part. So the paint was running and he stopped it running, and you can see that he did use often very stiff brushes to stop and to make the paint run in the directions that he wanted to make it run. And then he comes back and paints in details, and he sort of encourages the other marks, the other colours to come in and around the blue poles that we see dancing across the surface of the work. The history of the artist is very interesting because he had such a short career. Jackson Pollock was born in 1912 in Cody, Wyoming, which doesn't sound like a very sophisticated art world place to be. He was brought up in Arizona and California, and then when he was 18, he followed his brother to New York and he became an art student properly, and he trained with a traditional artist, American artist, Thomas Hart Benton, and he met his wife-to-be, Lee Krasner. And yet he was dead by the age of 44. So this is really a very, very short life as well as a short career. The time that we bought this painting in 1973, the artist had only been dead for 17 years. It was still a contemporary work, and a lot of people in Australia thought of this as a waste of money. I think they would have thought any art would have been a waste of money, or art that wasn't Rembrandt was a waste of money. But for Australia in the 20th century, coming towards the end of the 20th century, the last quarter of it, it was an exciting and interesting thing to do, and it made Blue Poles perhaps the most famous painting in Australian history. When people come to look at Blue Poles, often they're coming because it's so famous, because it was shocking, because it was a great cause célèbre. It was a famous thing that happened in Australian history. And it's linked with our government at the time and people's ideas about art. One of the things that's so interesting about Pollock and so fascinating when you look at other works by him, the National Gallery is lucky enough to have an earlier work as well as Blue Poles, but he's changing the nature of painting. Instead of having a focus, a single focus or an angle to look at, he makes it an all-over composition, and so you no longer can look at it from a single point of view. And perhaps it will mean something to you, and perhaps it won't, but either way, I think there's an exchange here that happens when you pay attention to a great work of art.